When it comes to classic movie monsters, I find every horror fan tends to have one that they gravitate to, and it says so much about them. Personally speaking, I swoon for Dracula, so while he's technically scary enough to make today's list, that little bias disqualified him for me. Sorry folks, there's just something about Bela Lugosi that I can't explain. Question for y'all, who do you consider the scariest movie monster ever? Let me know in the comments, and let's dive into some that I personally consider terrifying. Alrighty everybody, we're kicking off today with a creature that is permanently burned into my psyche, the bear in Annihilation. So this was a 2018 science fiction psychological horror film written and directed by Alex Garland, loosely based off of the 2014 novel of the same name by Jeff Vandermeer. The flick is great art because it leaves the audience unsettled, winding its story into the realm of the unexpected, particularly for those viewers who were just expecting a run-of-the-mill sci-fi action movie. As such, it's also a movie that's bound to frustrate and infuriate some viewers who crave clarity and normalcy. The movie veers into the unexpected, yet in a pointed way. Sequences like Tessa Thompson sprouting leaves and people getting attacked by a bear with human screams, for example, are horrifying but with specificity. However, Annihilation exists largely in the realm of metaphor. It's meant to put you in the same dreamlike state as the characters, offering explanations for what's happening, but also never announcing its themes as it tries to weave subtext into the text. Yeah, before I forget, back to that damn bear. The mutant bear, named Homerton, seems to be an American black bear, although slightly larger than its non-mutated brethren. And when Lena's team is ambushed by the bear, it seems to retain its pre-mutated form, minus some patches of skin showing around its neck and head where the fur has withered away. The bear reappears during Anya's interrogation of her teammates and torments the group, to put it lightly. I should note that it became more heavily mutated since they first made contact. Its body is largely unaffected, to less of a degree, but the skull of the bear is now visible, showing the lack of flesh on the noggin. Also, the bear's nose has now withered away, leaving the nasal cavity open, but the bear has a human skull embedded to its own. Human teeth are seen inside of the bear's mouth as a second row, while still retaining its own set. Now, the bear is initially shown to stalk the group while they rested at Fort Amaya, but it tore a hole in the fencing perimeter before swiftly grabbing Cass Shepard, dragging her away from the group while she screamed for help. Interestingly, while Lena found the grisly remains of Cass in the morning after, the bear didn't outright eat her, possibly leaving her body as a warning for the group. So when Anya began interrogating her teammates, the weak, croaked calls of "help me" distracted her, as if Cass somehow miraculously survived such an attack. However, the bear was the source of the calls, which he heralded with an ever so familiar bellow. While it circled around the bound trio, it seemed to constantly fill the air with bellows and the dying cries of Cass screaming once again, "help me," to instigate a reaction. It went as far as to stare down Ventress before clamping onto her shoulder as to break her, before it could further torment Ventress. Alerted by Anya firing away, it was quickly dealt with by ripping her jaw and throat apart before it could give the same treatment to the survivors. Thankfully, Josie was swift to take it down, ripping its skull apart with a hail of explosives. Look, if that damn thing isn't terrifying enough for anybody on a visual basis alone, I think its capabilities only add to the horrors. No thank you. I personally grew up in an area where bears were very much a real threat, so the flashbacks I'm getting right now aren't fun. You don't want to see those critters in your backyard. Trust me. We're moving on to our next creature before I start shuddering. Possum, the depressing psychological horror film directed by Matthew Holness, who cult horror fans may know as the creator and star of Garth Marenghi's Dark Place, tells a story as disturbing as the terrifying puppet monster that gives the film its title. It is horror in the truest sense of the word. Deeply disturbing, shocking, and just nasty. It uses an oppressive, unescapable atmosphere that matches the psychological unease and trauma of the main character. So just be warned, this isn't like a fun Friday night, bring your date out sort of thing. Leave the popcorn at home and bring the antidepressants instead. The story follows a disgraced puppeteer named Philip Connell, played by Sean Harris, who is forced to revisit his childhood home where his feeble uncle now resides. The tension between Philip and the utterly dislikable Uncle Maurice is very palpable. It's pretty clear that they have a troubled past together, to say the least. The only bag Philip brings on his journey is a leather duffel bag that houses a spider-like marionette called Possum that continually haunts him throughout his visit. He tries to discard the puppet, but no matter what he does, Possum seems to make its way back to him. For most of the film, only the puppet's massive spider legs are visible, making the reveal of the spider's human face all the more horrific. More than just a marionette, Possum is the manifestation of Philip's disturbing past, and its grotesque appearance is a direct reflection of his anguish. At its base, Possum is a very slow burn. There are really only two characters, a lot of really creepy book narration, and a nightmare of a puppet. Add in unsettling imagery and sparse dialogue and plot, and well, there you have it. It is a movie that is so depressing, grotesque, grotesque and exaggerated in its misery, while still maintaining a subtle balance between horror and the comedic. Look, I've seen my fair share of cursed-looking puppets and mascots in my time as an entertainer, particularly some really bad Paw Patrol and Peppa Pig examples jump into mind, but this thing? This demented beyond belief possum puppet monstrosity? It might just take the cake for the most terrifying puppet thing I've ever seen. Once again, that's saying something, folks. Okay, technically I've talked about this monster recently, but there was no way I was leaving The Thing off of this list. John Carpenter's The Thing is kind of like an espionage drama if you swap the international intelligence community for a remote research post in Antarctica and the search for a mole with the hunt for an alien parasite. Carpenter absolutely did something special with the aliens in They Live, but this is his greatest gift to sci-fi, in my opinion. You've got Kurt Russell, starring in what is arguably his best role ever, as pilot R.J. MacReady, a cunning hero almost overwhelmed by terror. From freaky practical effects fueled mutations to that fluid test scene, this flick is an example and an absolute staple of sci-fi excellence. And it scares the crap out of you to match. What makes the creature of this flick so unique and disgusting is its unpredictability. The thing could be anybody, and as an audience member, you really get that. The moments when you do see it, in one form or another, are disgusting, as the creature causes mayhem throughout gruesome practical effects and off-the-wall action sequences. One moment it's posing as your friend, and the next moment it's mutated that familiar face into something twisted, unimaginable, and extremely lethal. Also, it has the ability to live on even after being severed into multiple pieces. So even when you think, okay, we're all good, some portion of this little threat's gonna live on, just waiting to restart the whole cycle of ugh. Unlike a lot of creatures, the thing doesn't have any standard anatomy. It might very well be that it's a colonial organism whose assimilation instructions are carried on the genetic level. The shape-shifting nature means that the biology can be the same as whatever it's replicated, or is in the process of replicating. Thankfully, it's vulnerable to fire and maybe molecular acid, but it's very tolerant of cold. It can place itself in cryogenic stasis until you find it, and then, game over. When changing form, it bursts open and allows a variety of strange and terrifying forms and bits of previously assimilated anatomy to form. So we get a lot of tentacles, insect-like limbs, eyes, teeth, claws, and yeah, no thank you, it's disgusting to look at. And after it has assimilated an organism, it can imitate them perfectly. We're talking the memories, characteristics, mannerisms, every single trait, even anatomical anomalies and health defects are replicated. This creature only has assimilation and self-preservation in mind, and it's terrifying. Just burn it now. I don't want to ever see it on my screen ever again. Okay, here's another lesser loved creature. Who knows about Cthulhu? So this creature, also known as Mumbuan and John Whitney in its human form, is the main antagonist of the 1997 science fiction horror film The Relic, which came out the year I was born, and is based on the 1995 novel Relic by Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child. In the film, a detective and a biologist try to defeat the monster, which is on a killing spree in the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago. Now, the flick was filmed in Chicago at the Field Museum of Natural History, but hey, you don't always, have the same museum to the same thing. Production was actually originally intended to be held at the American Museum of Natural History in New York, but a deal could not be reached. So after taking interest in the film's premise, the Field Museum was like, yeah, you can film here. So they're like, okay, we will put your thing in our movie. The film was the second on-screen collaboration between Hunt, Miller, and supporting actor Chi Moi Lo, all three of whom also worked on the film Kindergarten Cop. The Cthulhu, the monster of this flick, is an ancient mutated animalistic hybrid with the characteristics of fish, insects, lizards, and big cats. Its body is quadrupedal, with a sloping back, and its backside is covered in muddy green, crocodile-like scales, and its underbelly has scales that are a pale flesh tone. A row of spines once again runs down, as well as a dark brown mane on the back of its head, and another mane at the base of its thin but muscular tail. The Cthulhu's head has two very small glowing white eyes, exposed gums, anglerfish-like teeth, and two pairs of tusks, or mandibles. You get a large one and a smaller one below the larger one, resembling those of insects. It is soon later revealed to be Dr. John Whitney, an anthropologist for the Museum of Natural History, after he drank a soup made by South American tribesmen which transformed him into the monster. It was portrayed by Vincent Hammond and Brian Steele, while its vocal sound effects were provided by Gary A. Hecker. As John Whitney in human form, he was portrayed by the late Louis Van Bergen. Just picturing it in my brain has me needing some major eye bleach after I sign off today, cause yikes. No thank you. Alrighty, how about we end today with a classic, The Invisible Man. When it comes to the classic Universal horror monsters, I'm talking Frankenstein, his bride, Dracula, the Mummy, Gillman, Wolfman, Phantom of the Opera, the Mummy, Igor, we're talking everybody. I think The Invisible Man takes the cake. The brilliant scientist Dr. Jack Griffin, played by Claude Rains, achieves the impossible. He can turn himself invisible, but he can't really find a way to reverse the effects, and soon after, the stress of being constantly invisible kind of strains his mind, turning him into an unhinged killer hell-bent on world domination. This original film is the best movie in the Invisible Man series, featuring what is easily Universal's most lethal character with the highest kill count out of any of the other monsters. Griffin causes destruction and mayhem wherever he goes, and wants to instill fear and panic in everybody. So while it is possible to feel sympathy for him, since his experiment drove him to become evil, it still doesn't excuse his actions as he tries to take over the world. So the Invisible Man was actually in development for Universal as early as 1931, when Richard L. Shire and Robert Florey suggested that the novel would make a good follow-up to the big hit Dracula. On the film's release in 1933, it was a great financial success for Universal and received strong reviews from several trade publications, like the New York Times, which placed it among their best in film for 1933. The film spawned several sequels that were relatively unrelated to the original film, though. In 2008, this movie was selected for the United States National Film Registry by the Library of Congress as being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. Look, I rest my case. The creature is terrifying, and the movie has made its mark on history. And that brings us to the end of our time, so please let me know if y'all want a part 2, because I could talk about horror movies forever. I've been Alexa, your resident Yuki Spooky Girly, and if you enjoyed my ramblings today, could you help us out by giving this video a like, subscribing if you aren't already, hit the bell for more movie monster chatter from us here at Top 5 Scary Videos, and I'll see y'all next time, you lovely spooky people.